Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Happy Friday. We're doing a lunch and learn today, and we're excited that you guys have decided to join us. We're going to be talking about a sometimes overlooked topic, but one that's very critical to the success of our students. My name is Amanda Clark, and I am joined today by my colleague, Constance Alphonse. And here we go. So, if you're new to us at Lessard, we are a project within the Human Development Center at LSU Health Sciences Center in New Orleans. And what that means is the Human Development Center, or HDC, is the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. So we're one of 68 in the continental US and its territories. This nationwide network is a resource, and it addresses finding solutions to issues that impact people with disabilities and their families through technical assistance, training, information dissemination, as well as research. Our team is actually a multidisciplinary team. We have special educators, school administrators, educational diagnosticians, school psychologists, and many, many more. We partner with school district systems and networks and individual schools to help them improve their practices in special education through team action planning, direct training, and coaching in classrooms. Let's see, we let everybody in. Good deal.
Hey, Amanda.
Hey.
Can you record?
I think we are.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't see that.
Oh, that's okay. I'm glad you reminded me, though. You know, I like to forget. So we have some resources for you right there on our Lessard website at lessard.org. It's full of resources for educators and parents, and we even have a feature at the top of the website called Ask Lessard. So if you have a question that might be specific about your classroom or a student need, you can always fill out the form, and one of us will get back to you. Throughout the presentation today, we're going to talk about different resources, and Constance is going to go ahead and drop the link in the chat for you to a Google Drive so that you have access to those resources right at your fingertips. And so now it's time to really dig into the meat potatoes. So let's go. Let's talk about collaboration. And so collaboration is effective collaboration, we know, is essential to supporting our students and their achievement areas for all students, especially our diverse learners. This makes it so crucial within our school systems. We know that it's imperative for teams to collaborate effectively to improve student achievement, especially those diverse learners. And there are varying degrees of collaboration that range from no or low integration or interaction to a very high integration or interaction of collaboration. And at that lower level, there are those people that know about each other, they know they exist, but there's really not any communication. Everybody's making decisions related to the student independently. While at that higher level where you're really collaborating, the team works together towards a shared goal and communicates frequently and makes decisions together. The relationship in a collaborative team is really built on mutual trust between the members, and it benefits the student. But why collaborate at all? Isn't it ridiculously hard to do that? The answer is no. There's a lot of benefits for collaboration. It builds trust amongst the team. It encourages participation and different viewpoints. It validates everybody's opinions, and it really can minimize the stress of disagreement when it arises. When collaboration is truly student-centered, the student can set goals and meet those goals because we're all working in parallel. We're all going together. And it also models for the student positive interactions. It prepares the student for the future, and it provides the necessary support to achieve student success within the inclusive environment. A collaborative team is just essential for us to gain the most for our students from their educational program. And we're going to continue to talk about this team more today. So Constance, tell me a little bit about who's on this team.
Thank you, Amanda. Think about all of those people who interact and work with the student on any given day. Each of those people, they have an important information, an important role that the team can use that will best support the student. So often when we think about a student receiving specialized instruction, we think of that special ed teacher. And while the special ed teacher is often the de facto leader of the team, because of their knowledge of special ed law and how to provide those accommodations and modifications, the special education teacher by themselves is not the team. In fact, we know that IDEA requires at a minimum that the big four participate when we have an IEP meeting. And so when we talk about the big four, we mean the parent, the special ed teacher, the ODR or the administrator, and then the general ed teacher. In addition to those other providers who can provide us information about the student. So now before we move on, we're going to dig a little bit more into that role of the special ed teacher and some of those responsibilities that they have to manage each day. When we think about those special ed teacher roles and responsibilities, we really can divide them into 4 categories. We can divide them into managing the classroom environment, planning the instructional program, monitoring and assessing student progress, and then collaborating with other school personnel. So another important aspect of the special ed teacher's job is really to create that safe learning environment. And we know that without that safe learning environment, really learning can't take place. So we really have to make sure as special ed teachers that we're intentional in establishing those routines and procedures for students, and establishing a supportive classroom environment that builds and fosters relationships with students and among students. Then we know a big part of that special ed teacher's role is really planning that instructional program. We have to include writing those IEP goals and designing lessons that allows that student to access the curriculum and access learning. And then they're planning those lessons and setting rigorous learning outcomes for students and providing accommodations and modifications. And then we can think about monitoring and assessing student progress. That's so essential, right? Into making sure that our students are learning. So when we monitor and assess student progress, we want to see if they're making progress with the goals that we've set for them. And if not, we have to think about how do we change what we've done in order to help them make progress towards academic standards and state standards. And we're using that data that we're collecting continuously to inform our instructional decisions. But then that big one, it's the last one, but it's really huge. We have to collaborate with other school personnel as special ed teachers. And that list includes parents and guardians. It's going to include our administrators. It's going to include our gen ed teacher colleagues. It's going to include the many related service providers that are a part of that child's IEP team. And then it's also going to include the paraeducators. So today, we're going to spend our primary focusing on this last responsibility for special ed teachers. And how do we really, as special educators, build a collaborative environment that best supports our student learning? So now, when we think about that student again and that special ed teacher, now that we know there's so many more people, the person that knows that child better than anyone is going to be the parent. And as such, we always want to make sure that we're involving parents in any discussions regarding their child. We need to get their input. After all, it's their right as parents to be involved in that decision making for their child. It's also important that we involve administrators in discussions. As a member of the team, the administrator can really provide us with valuable information about what resources may be available to support a student that the team can consider. They can also help us problem solve scheduling conflicts and staffing challenges. Then we have our general ed teacher. Our gen ed teacher is generally considered the expert on the general ed curriculum and the standards. They can help the team determine what a student's peers are expected to do, so the team can then consider how to help the student achieve a standard. Then we have paraeducators or our paraprofessionals. They work with the student, and in some ways, they know the student better than anyone because they see them across so many different environments and various classrooms and school locations during the day. As such, sometimes our paraeducators may be the only person on the student team that knows which situations the student is going to function best in, and then which ones are going to cause that student great concern. Therefore, it's always important that we're including our paraeducator in those team discussions. Then we have our related service providers. And when we talk about related service providers, that includes our occupational therapists who support with fine motor skills and sensory needs. We have our physical therapists who support with gross motor skills. We have our adapted physical educators who support with gross motor skill development. And then we have speech therapists who support the student's communication development. And then sometimes one important team member that's often overlooked could be our school nurses. And our school nurses, we know we're going to include them for our students who have medical needs, but we can also include them for students who may not have a medical diagnosis. So they can really be an important part of the team to really help us communicate with medical providers, parents, and educators. I can't tell you how many times my school nurse made such a difference in my communication with families and helping us as a team set up the supports that our students needed. Now, there are some other people that are not featured on this slide that we want to consider, including your pupil appraisal staff. Maybe your wraparound staff if the student receives wraparound services. And then there might be a school or an outside counselor that the student receives supports about. And then don't forget that parents can also request someone from outside of the school to participate, such as a parent advocate or an educational therapist, because they have information as well that can be included in those team discussions. And then just one final note as we talk about this team. Although we're thinking of team members as part of the IEP, today when we're discussing team members, we're not just talking about as it relates to IEP meetings. We're talking about that regular collaboration outside of IEP meetings that support the student's day-to-day success. So Amanda now is going to give us a little bit more information about those collaboration best practices.
Yep. And I think it's only the right way to start with our parents and guardians, right? We know that positive relationships with parents lead to positive outcomes for our students, which is why this is where we really need to focus our collaborative best practices. When you first meet your student, you really want to reach out to your student's parent or guardian with just a simple phone call. Introduce yourself. You want to learn a little bit about the student and be interested. You also want to consider learning about the parents' goals for the students and clarify any medical information or questions that you may have as you are going through intake paperwork. You might also want to consider asking the parent their preferred method of communication. Do they prefer an email, a text, a phone call? Is there a best time of the day to contact them? And how frequently do they like to be contacted? Is this a everyday contact or a weekly contact? You're going to want to follow up, though, with that initial phone call with something like an all about me and a preference assessment so that you can collect more information on the student's areas of strength, their preferences, and their needs. Another thing you really want to include is you're going to want to include information on the IEP team members and how to contact each of those team members. This information is important because you're building a relationship not only with your student, but with your students' families as well. Remember, you're being mindful that you're not just communicating when there's a challenge. You don't want to just communicate when there's a challenge to a parent or guardian, but you also want to communicate those successes because they are there. You should really maintain that regular communication with them. And you can do this during different times of the year. Some options, during progress report time or just regular report card time, parent-teacher conferences. Depending on the needs of your student, you may even have daily communication logs, something that may support their behavior tracking, or even something that the parent, signs and reviews each day with their student. Prior to your annual IEP meeting, when you send home that IEP notification, consider including an information form for your parents to fill out with things that indicate their vision for their students' future, right? Get their feedback on their students' progress, what they're seeing at home this year, and things that have worked really well, accommodations or modifications. And so as we kind of wrap up the best practices for parents, it's really important to remember that communication with families is not limited to a once-a-year thing, but it's an ongoing process. And so, Constance, tell us a little bit more about how we can also support our students.
already told you guys that administrators are an important part of the team. However, we know, right, that their time is limited because they have so many responsibilities and so many things on their plate. So as you maximize your collaboration with administrators, we want you to keep some of these best practices in mind when communicating with your administrators. Because they receive so many requests from various people throughout the day, and they have so many meetings to attend and teacher evaluations to complete, respect their time by communicating with them in writing as early as possible. This helps to ensure that for you and your students, that your needs are going to be met efficiently and in a timely manner, since they're less likely to forget what they have in writing versus what they heard in passing in the hallway. And then they'll have plenty of time when you're communicating with them early to consult their schedule to make sure that they are able to meet your needs. So at the beginning of the year, as you're communicating with your administrator and as you're talking to your administrators, ask them what their preference is for scheduling IEPs. For some administrators, they may share an IEP calendar and ask for you to schedule all IEPs using that calendar. Others might request that you email them and contact them for available dates and times prior to reaching out to the parents to schedule the meeting. You also want to consult with your administrator on how they want to receive draft copies of their IEPs and in what timelines they want to receive those draft copies. For example, some administrators want a printed copy of the draft IEP 7 days in advance of the scheduled meeting. Others, like me, they're okay if you just send them a little email saying the IEP is ready for them to review. And some of them want it no less than 24 hours prior to the meeting. But most importantly, as you're collaborating with your administrator, don't be afraid to seek them out for support. They can really be a valuable resource as you're addressing those scheduling and those staffing challenges. It could be supporting a student during enrichment and you need someone to go with them. It could be a planning time that you need to meet with the general ed teacher or to meet with your paraprofessional. Those are the things you want to reach out to your administrator about and make sure that they know that there's a need, so then they're involved in helping to solve that need. The key, though, to effectively collaborating with your administrator is knowing what their expectations are.
It's true. And as we go to our next practice, we're going to talk about our general education teachers and how important they are. And our administrators can help us in collaborating with those general education teachers. We know that the general education teacher is our expert on those curriculum standards and on the curriculum being taught. They are a key person in student academics. With the ultimate goal of supporting diverse learners in the classroom, there are some best practices that we should really consider when we are collaborating with general educators. At the beginning of the year, or when a new student is enrolled or identified, provide copies of the IEP and discuss in detail what the student's needs are. This could include things like discussions around communication support or behavior support, as well as academic support that's in place. It's also important to discuss how these supports might be provided within their classroom. So you really should also review and discuss weekly instructional plans with your general education teacher and discuss considerations for what supports the student will need to access and be engaged in the lesson. And how does that lesson actually align with the student's IEP goals and objectives? These are things we should collaborate around and talk about. Consider how the student's expected to demonstrate mastery in the lesson and what data are we going to collect to show that progress towards those IEP goals, as well as the progress towards the state standards. So to make the data collection process smooth, make sure that any data collection sheets are shared or made together collaboratively during a meeting. And remember, as you draft a new IEP, it's super important to include your general education teacher in the development of that IEP by discussing their observations regarding the student, as well as the needs, but also the progress that they're making, not just towards their IEP goals, but those grade level standards as well. And so next, we're going to look at another person who supports our students, which is our paraeducators.
So now as we look more closely at the role of that special ed teacher as it relates to paraeducators and that supervision and direction. As the instructional leader in the classroom, that teacher, regardless of if you're a special ed teacher or a gen ed teacher, you really are the one responsible for making sure that the paraeducator knows what the specific expectations for your classroom are. Making sure that you're giving them an orientation so that they know those roles and responsibilities. Because from classroom to classroom, those expectations change. How we gather our students and dismiss our students change. And so that's even important, even for paras that have been paras for years, because each teacher is so different in setting up those routines and procedures and that behavior management system for their classroom. And when you're providing that orientation to the paras, you want to make sure that you're providing them information about the specific students in that classroom that they'll be supporting. So they need to know what specific supports that child needs, what accommodations they may need or modifications, what specific IEP goals and objectives they're working on, and any behavior plans or any other relevant information that helps that para really accomplish their job. And then as a teacher, you're also responsible for creating those schedules for paras. And if you watched our very first Lunch and Learn series on this topic, then you heard our colleague Joseph give you so much information really on how to create effective schedules for your paraeducators. So we're not going to really dig into that today. And he also really talks about delegating those tasks to the paras and just making sure that you're sharing that load with your paras based on their ability level and their skill level. And so you want to make sure that when you're delegating something to a para, for example, tube feeding, if they haven't been trained on how to tube feed, then you don't want to delegate that task. But on the flip side of that, if they've said, hey, I've got an interest in learning how to tube feed, then maybe you want to reach out to your administrator and say, okay, how can we get such and such trained? They've demonstrated this interest in there. And you collaborate with the school nurse, and then you get tube feeding. And then you can start allowing that para to do that and providing them that ongoing feedback to make sure that they're effectively and efficiently doing that role. And then as the instructional leader in the classroom, you want to make sure that you're explaining those instructional plans to your para because you want to make sure that they know specifically when they're collecting data, what they're supposed to be doing, how they're providing the support, what levels of prompting, what data collection methods they're using, and then how you want them to provide that feedback to students and report that progress back to you. So oftentimes when we're working with paras, what we'll see is the para kind of goes off in the room and they're doing their own thing and no one's really providing them feedback about how they're doing in that role and that responsibility. So we want to provide them feedback about what's working and what they're doing well, because right, that pumps them up and that makes them more motivated to keep working and working hard to support their students. But then we also want to provide them feedback about tweaks or changes we need them to make to better be able to effectively support our students. So an example might be if you observe a para who's typically late to take a student to the sensory room, and then as a result, that's causing problems for that student because that student's having meltdowns, then you want to discuss that with that para, like that designated time for the sensory room break to occur, as well as offer supports that that para may be able to put in place, such as an alarm as a reminder to help them that they're supposed to be taking that student to the sensory room. And then sometimes some of that feedback is also going to include informing your administrator of what's working well with that para, as well as areas of needed support for the para. And then when you're providing feedback, you also want to provide that ongoing training and coaching to your paras so that they know they're able to develop as professionals the same way that we develop as professionals. And then maybe finally, the last one is you're wanting to hold regular planning and scheduling regular collaboration meetings with them. It really allows that opportunity for you guys to discuss what's working well for your students, to discuss those specific student needs, as well as discuss staff needs. Best practice is really to do that daily for 10 to 15 minutes to discuss the plan for the day. But everyone, we're living in the real world, so we know that's not always possible. And that's not necessarily always built into the school schedule. So remember how we said earlier, that's a good point and a good time to get your school administrator involved so they can help you identify a time for that collaboration to happen.
Okay. And last, we're going to be talking about partnering with our related service providers. And this includes our speech language pathologist, our occupational therapist, our physical therapist, and our adapted PE teacher. It's really important to know that not every student needs every related service provider. Once the student is qualified for special education services, the special education teacher should reach out to each of the related service providers, and those were determined following that student's evaluation. It's important that the special education teacher reach out to learn about the services that the student is going to be provided at the school level. And you should also inquire about scheduling. Where, when, how often will the student be receiving these services? And what strategies can be implemented across all settings? How can I bring this into the general education classroom with me or to PE? Often, related service providers will only see a student 1 or 2 days per week, and they're going to provide some specific plans and even strategies for you to implement with your student. For example, an occupational therapist will often leave a sensory program that a student might need to follow, while a speech therapist might implement a communication device and a voice output device for a student to request help while they're in the classroom. As the special educator, you should know how to implement that sensory program, and you should know how to use the communication device. But if you're not sure, you should ask. Reach out to your related service provider and have them model for you how to use these strategies, and then have them provide feedback on you using these strategies as well. Even if you're not the person who's leading the daily program, you should really know what you can do to provide information to others around you, to train other providers, such as the paraeducator and their general education teachers. Since related service providers don't actually work with students as frequently as you do, it's even more important to maintain that ongoing communication with them. And so you want to communicate successes as well as challenges to your service providers. And they can problem solve with you, even if it seems like the need area might not really be in their zone. For example, you might not think it's relevant for a speech therapist or an OT or a PT to know that a student's having trouble transitioning from the car in the morning to the cafeteria. However, an OT or a speech therapist could maybe be the related service provider who provides social narratives for you to help the student understand the expectations of that transition. And sometimes a related service provider will leave you information to provide to the parents and vice versa. The parent will share information with you that the related service provider needs to know. It's very important that you try to maintain that ongoing communication between all of the parties involved, so that we can initiate contact whenever a specific program that's been recommended is working great, or maybe it's not having the expected results we expected. And we can problem solve together, and those related service providers can make some additional recommendations for us. And so, as a note, be sure to always document your communication with parents and service providers. And we know it's hard to know exactly what the role of each service provider is, but you're in luck, because our next Lunch and Learn series, we're going to actually hear from an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, and a deafblind service provider. So tune in. So in summary, today we have talked about effective collaboration, and we know that effective collaboration really prioritizes the student. It involves our various stakeholders, which include our parents, our administrators, our teachers, our related service providers, and our paraeducators. And really, it's supported by that ongoing communication, which occurs regularly and frequently. So in the chat, I'm going to drop the Google Drive link again so that you have access to the resources that we shared today. And if you could take a moment, please, and scan our little survey. We would like some feedback about this training today. This is how we improve. And don't forget to join us on December 1st as we begin our Related Service Provider series. And don't forget to connect with us. We can be found on Facebook at lasard.project and on Instagram on project_Lasard throughout the month and the year. And we provide monthly resources there. Thank y'all so much, and y'all have a great afternoon.